According to the preseason win total, UCLA is a contender in the Pac-12 in 2023. I don't buy it.
You are Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On Pac-12. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with our media rights-free and beloved Conference of Champions. Like, comment, subscribe, rate, review, please, and thank you wherever you listen to or watch this show. Today, we have my man, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer. He's the host of Locked On UCLA. He is at Zach_and_Yox on Twitter. We can't talk about UCLA without him, so let's just hop right into it, Zach. I am not completely down on UCLA to where I think they're a sub-500 football team in 2023, but they get lumped in because of their preseason win total with the Oregons, the Utahs, the USCs, the Washingtons, and the Oregon States of the world, who are seen as conference contenders, and I just don't quite buy them. I would pick them as the least likely of that group of six to win the league. Your thoughts?
I mean, I'm kind of with you, Spencer. I know I'm an optimistic fella. You probably, if you've watched Locked On UCLA, think I'm an optimistic fool. But
Nothing
I just
wrong
don't
with that.
think that this is truly a year to contend in the top two in the Pac-12. I know the divisionless title game truly helps their chances, I think, quite a bit if they go on a sneaky dark horse run. But it has to be like last year. If they go 6-0, they get to that big game in the middle of the season, then they have to win those big games at the end. And instead of having a veteran-laden roster like they had last year, they've got quite a few new pieces filling in key spots this year. As much as they are highly touted, I think it's a lot to ask for UCLA to even be in the conference title game and expected to be there. They can shock us, both you and me, but we just can't expect this team to be there at this moment.
I saw them last year as a team that was half dark horse, half legitimate contender going into the year. And then they made it clear in the early going with that 6-0 start and really that statement win, which I thought they would get against Utah in the middle of the year at home. That was kind of their, put your foot in the ground and say, we're here and we're here to contend. Now, the end of the season did not go as planned. You had the stumble against Arizona. You lost the close game to USC, lost the Sun Bowl to Pitt. Things kind of spiraled from there, but things were looking really good for UCLA. And the reason that I have them as a pullback team this year, they were 9-3 in the regular season a year ago. I think that's their ceiling, and we're going to get to their schedule on today's show and talk about the quarterback situation as well. I think 9-3 is their ceiling, whereas last year I thought their ceiling was 11-1, and I predicted them to go 10-2. They very nearly did. I think they're in the 7-5 to 9-3 range, and the biggest thing that nags my mind about UCLA, Zach, is, look, I know Chip Kelly knows how to win football games. They do have talent that they've brought in to replace the talent that they've lost. But the talent you lost at the most important position, replacing Dorian Thompson-Robinson, even if one of the guys ends up being good, they can't be as good this year as DTR was a year ago.
No, they can't. And you can't forget Zach Charbonnet. You had just so many pieces stepping up in the right moments of games that you can't really expect, despite what they brought, all the transfer portal hype. It's not going to work every year, can it, Spencer? I just don't think it can. And there's a lot of question marks in the Pac-12, right? There's a lot of interesting teams at the bottom with new coaches that you don't really know. Are they the worst team ever? Or like a Deion Sanders, is he going to be a good team with them hitting the portal? UCLA is supposedly supposed to have this easy Pac-12 slate. I'm not fully buying that, which is why they have this preseason contender hype. This schedule is a lot tougher than people think, but they still certainly should make a bowl game.
Yeah, no, I'm not thinking they go out there and are going to be 5-7. I would be surprised if they do that And look, you know the trenches and the non-glamour positions, the defensive backs, linebackers of the world, offensive line, better than I do. But I've seen Chip Kelly be able to score too many points in his time as a college coach, including his time at UCLA, for me to think, yeah, they're going to be a disaster this year. They're in a state of rebuild. They're in a state of turnover. Like, they have turnover at the most important position, which is why I don't see them as a conference contender. But I do think that they are still at the point where they have more talent on their roster probably than a good half of the Pac-12, or at least a decent share of the Pac-12 comparatively. But I just think that when you have a quarterback league as deep as the Pac-12, Caleb Williams, Michael Penix, Bo Nix, Cam Rising, now you have Shedeur Sanders in there. You have Cam Ward at Washington State, Jaden DeLora at Arizona. It just feels like that is too deep, and you're just expecting either a five-star to be great, a transfer to work out, a veteran who could be a solid starter to kind of go beyond his potential. You're just asking something that is not impossible, but also doesn't feel particularly likely to me.
Yeah, when you're asking multiple players to replace NFL draft picks, that's not always a recipe for success, right? Even the best programs have a down year, and while they're trying to compete with things across town, I think UCLA in their best season is one, taking down USC on the road would be a win, and just getting to a good bowl game is a truly optimistic, realistic version of this year.
Yeah, I like the offensive pieces that they've brought in. Carson Steele, the running back from Ball State. I thought that the best receiver to go into the portal after Dorian Singer last year was J. Michael Sturdivant from Cal. He is a number one guy. He'll replace Jake Bobo. That's all great. But again, when you lose your three best offensive players from a year ago, DTR, Charbonnet, Jake Bobo, even if you have good pieces to replace them, I don't know that you can expect the production to replicate on that front. But the schedule for UCLA factors into a lot of this. And it's kind of an interesting way to view this, at least I think it is. There are teams that have an 8.5 win total with a Utah schedule, and then there's 8.5 win total with a UCLA schedule. And this is just for the regular season. And though the number is the same, and people may look at UCLA and Utah and say, oh, they have the same win total, they should have the same chance to win the Pac-12. No. Because Utah, in their non-conference slate, has 2 Power 5 opponents. UCLA's got 0. And I think if you took UCLA and gave them Utah's non-conference schedule with Florida and Baylor, you wouldn't see a preseason win total, according to FanDuel Sportsbook, of 8.5 wins. I think, Zach, it would probably be 7 would be my guess. I don't think it would be 8.5. So I think that context is kind of required when you look at, these win totals for those of you watching on YouTube right now and say, oh, well, Oregon State, UCLA, and Utah should all be about the same. Like, no, they don't all have the same schedule there. I think Utah's got the toughest schedule of the bunch.
Yeah, Utah has got an extremely tough non-conference schedule, and I think UCLA has an underrated schedule, but nothing compares to a Baylor and a Florida in 2 of those first 3 games. Your
first 2 games. Their first 2 games are Florida at home, Baylor on the road, and then they play Weber State. It's like, why not Weber State week 1 as a tune-up for Florida and Baylor? Like, what are we doing here? I don't know.
Or week 0, whatever it works.
It's something. Yeah, something would have been better than that. But we got to break down UCLA's schedule because I think there are some interesting components. And I agree. I think there's an underrated component to their non-conference schedule. Nothing underrated about FanDuel, though, because that is America's #1 sports book. You can take your first swing at betting Major League Baseball on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run to which team do you think is going over their win total in the Pac-12, under their win total. I like Cal over. All you everydayers out there, I'm probably crazy, but I like Cal over 4.5 wins. I like UCLA under 8.5 wins. Whatever you want to bet, you can get it at FanDuel. all in an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Sign up today. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. A refreshingly ice-cold second segment sip as we get to UCLA's schedule here. So the Bruins' non-conference schedule on the outset, Zach, at the outset, whatever you're supposed to say there. English is a dumb language, regardless. You look at it and you say, okay, no Power 5 opponents. Well, that's not great. But Coastal Carolina and San Diego State, not exactly, as my grandfather would say, Willie off the pickle boat for G5 schools. But still, you were supposed to have Michigan this year, or was that just, yeah, you were supposed to have Michigan in 22 and 23. Michigan bailed because they're a bunch of cowards, just like Ohio State bailed on Washington, absolute cowards. Like, I understand it, but also, I'm going to come on here and call you a coward for doing that, because it's worse for us as college football fans that instead of having a non-conference schedule of Coastal Carolina, San Diego State, and Michigan, it's Coastal Carolina, San Diego State, and North Carolina Central. Can't wait for that absolute barn burner on Pac-12 Network in Week 3 there for the Bruins. But I don't think this non-conference schedule does a lot for the Bruins. And the thing that I look at with those three opponents, including future Pac-12 member San Diego State, of course. But if you look at those games, if UCLA doesn't start the season in the AP Top 25, Zach, I don't think a 3-0 start is going to move them there. I think they'd have to win that game at Utah to crack the top 25 if they don't start there in the preseason.
Yeah, it's something similar to what they had last year, right? Last year they had the 7 home games. They had the very easy-esque preseason schedule. It didn't seem like they should lose. This is a season where if things go totally wrong, they could easily go 1-2, 2-1 to start the year.
I don't know if I could see them going 1-2. I could see 2-1.
Worst case scenario, we've seen, say a quarterback plays bad, an injury, that could potentially be crazy. That's a worst case scenario.
Okay, yeah.
Definitely 2-1 is a possibility. 3-0 is the expectation. And just like last year, it'll be that Utah game before anybody respects UCLA if they start 3-0. And if you can beat Utah on the road early before it's cold, we don't really know the rising health situation completely. At least I'm not fully aware of that, how they might play. And maybe they're beaten up after Baylor and Florida and everything. If they can go knock off Utah, then you've got some eyes with a sneaky October start to get that going. But I do think that non-conference schedule is a time where a lot of pieces can get a good opportunity to start.
Yeah, I think it can be, okay, we're 3-0, we've avoided disaster. I don't think, look, the most likely game to lose in there is at San Diego State. I'm not up to date on Coastal Carolina, whether or not they're going to be making another, run as a long-term
McCall's
undefeated.
back, so McCall should be back. Their starting quarterback who was in the portal.
Okay, that helps.
A lot of talent, but I think a coaching change really kind of takes off the steam. But if you see UCLA struggle with Coastal Carolina week 1, don't be surprised, especially if the defense isn't up to par for the Bruins yet. But that should be a high-scoring game, I would hope and expect, for a Pac-12 After Dark, that late Saturday night opener. But the San Diego State, which we should, I think, have an exciting sold-out Snapdragon Stadium, if that's not rocking and the Bruins on the edge of near defeat, then I don't know what that atmosphere can be. It should be awesome.
Yeah, it should be when you have a Southern California team and you have the school in there that's basically the team or school that you're replacing, assuming San Diego State ever gets into the Pac-12. Like, part of the reason the Aztecs are a top expansion candidate is, well, you can't just not be in Southern California. That's not an option for the Pac-12 presidents, and I think fans probably feel that way as well. So I think there'd be a high level of intrigue. I wonder, like, let's assume, I hope for these sorts of things all the time, but do I ever get what I want? Rarely. So I hope that at that time, by the time the game rolls around, we'll know that San Diego State will one day be a member of the Pac-12. At that point in time, Zach, I got to be honest, I'll be rooting for San Diego State.
Oh, goodness.
I would now, if they're not coming to the conference, then I don't feel as strongly about it, though might still be rooting for San Diego State. I don't know. Aztec fans out there, they're big fan. If you didn't know, the Aztec fans out there, what's the name of that show? It's like Mount Montezuma, or the Sons of Montezuma. All the Sons of Montezuma out there. Big fans of Locked On Pac-12. So I gotta show the love back there. So conference play then begins for UCLA. And they start with at Utah, which is pretty brutal. It's like, hey, here's Pac-12 conference play. Here's the 2-time defending champs. Oh, by the way, you're on the road in Salt Lake City. That's a pretty rough beginning there, and I agree is going to be the first show me what you're made of, show me what you got moment for UCLA. And, the good news for whoever's playing quarterback is you're going to have 3 games to kind of get it right or get yourself in the best possible situation there with the rest of your team. But what I notice about this schedule, Zach, that's tough for the Bruins, 3 out of the first 4 conference games on the road. I mean, you talk about the Pac-12 saying, don't let the door hit you on the way out. That's kind of what that feels like to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. They do get that bye week earlier in the Pac-12 schedule, so they can get that rest. It's not just 3 games in 4 weeks. It's the 4 games in, I believe, 5 weeks, so they get the extra week. But Utah to start, hey, I'd rather play them in September than I'd rather play them in late October or November out in Salt Lake City. So that's all I'm saying. Get them early before they get hot late like the Utes did last year. And then Washington State, sneaky tough home game. Not really sure what the Cougars are going to bring, but I don't think that should be anything lighthearted. Those road games, those are going to be extremely, extremely entertaining.
Yeah, so they start with at Utah on September 23rd. Then they have the bye, which is a really early bye, but like you said, not the worst thing in the world. And that's probably, how the Pac-12 is justifying this stretch for them of Utah by Washington State at home and then at Oregon State and then at Stanford. I expect them to win that game at Stanford. I don't think the Cardinal will be anything to bat your eyelashes at in 2023.
I mean, Troy Taylor, they're talking about all that love. What is it, Elijah Brown in SoCal? They're making some noise.
Oh, no. I completely agree that they are making noise. They have a top 15 recruiting class. Did you know, fun fact, Zach, as we record this show, Stanford has a higher 2024 recruiting class ranking than Alabama. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Crazier. So I'm just saying, crazy. I mean, is that going to last? No, of course not. But does it exist right now, and is it kind of funny and also indicative of what Troy Taylor's doing there? Yes. But do I expect those changes in year one? No, because his roster is basically all the same because they can't bring in transfers over there. So he's got a lot of ground to make up. But their win totals, you can see, are on YouTube, is 3.5, tied for Colorado for the lowest in the Pac-12, according to our friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook. They're what I've since dubbed, since seeing this graphic, a right column team rather than a left column team. But anyway, so they go Utah, come back home against Washington State. I think that's going to be a good game. UCLA and Washington State down at the Rose Bowl. Then you go at Oregon State, at Stanford, and host Colorado. That's a stretch there. Those 4 games off the bye, I think you're doing well if you win 2. I think you're doing great if you win 3. I think you're backing up the conference contender expectation or desire, shall we say, if you win all 4.
Yeah, when you come off a bye and you play Utah, this is the typical UCLA formula. You play Utah, we get all hyped because they get 4-0, and then you lay an egg on an 8:30 Pacific time kickoff against Washington State, beat Oregon State, who all of a sudden has hype, and then you barely beat a Stanford and Colorado. That's a UCLA formula for success and disaster at the same time. And then lo and behold, who comes around in November? Arizona. And you're like, oh, not this story again. Not this story again with the team that's confident from last year. That is the most naysaying UCLA fans' brain on how the season could go in a best, worst case scenario going down after the bye.
Yeah, and I would not sleep on that Arizona game, not just because they're an ascending program, not just because they beat UCLA last year, but because that game is in Tucson. And look, I don't know what exactly Arizona is going to have in store this year, but look, I'm an Oregon fan. I've seen strange things happen in the desert a lot over the years, Zach. A lot. And so I wouldn't sleep on that game. So then the final 3 games on their conference schedule, they host Arizona State. That's a winnable game. They go at USC, and then they play Cal at home. A Cal team, by the way, that I'm higher on than most. also gave UCLA kind of a scare in the last week of the season in 2022.
Everybody did, Spencer. Come on. At the end of 2022, they could have rolled out Weber State, and Weber State could have given UCLA a game. Come on. I mean, that's that's ridiculous, but that's just kind of how it seemed like, right? Anybody was going to give UCLA a game, other than Stanford.
The negative momentum. It had just snowballed at that point, right? It was just
the mojo was gone.
Yeah, the mojo was gone, I think, is the way of looking at it for sure. So they're one of the teams this year that have to play 5 road conference games, and this alternates, by the way. This is part of the fun of being a conference commissioner and having teams and everybody, is to ensure that there's fairness in this stuff and there's a regular rotation and matchups and everything like that. And as I've hosted the show for the last year and a couple months, it's been fun to kind of like see that stuff and understand, oh, that's why we play this team. Or, oh, we played this team because we played their travel partner on the road last year, and we're not playing both those teams because they're in the formerly other opposite division, so we're going to play them this year. So like you guys went at who's a North team from last year. You guys went at Cal last year. You are now going to go to Cal, or no, Cal is going to come down. Anyway, yeah. There's all that sort of stuff. But
could be the end of a long-standing football rivalry there. That's one of the longest played football games in college football.
Oh, I mean, it looks like it's going to be the end. I mean, I guess when they get to the Big Ten, they could set up a Florida State, Iowa State sort of matchup. But yeah, people don't understand. And you know why people don't think about that, Zach, is they think of it as Cal. It's UC Berkeley, as in UC Los Angeles. And so people don't really associate them as like, oh, they're these big rivals, because they just think USC, UCLA, because they share the same city. But UCLA is going to be paying what has been dubbed calimony, which is a hilarious term, to Cal to go to the Big Ten because of the historical ties between those two schools. So they'll continue playing. The team in the North that you miss this year, or one of them, that actually works out as a big break for UCLA this year, is they miss Oregon and they miss Washington. So those are the kind of old North teams who they play, on the road at Oregon last year, on the road at Oregon State this year. So then if they had, continued in the Pac-12 going forward, Oregon would have gone to UCLA as they did in 2021, and then Oregon State would have come to UCLA the following year. But I think what works out well for UCLA, and again, back to our earlier conversation of, their win total is 8.5, but is their schedule kind of breaking for them in a way that's inflating that win total compared to what their actual talent is? I think that's the way they could backdoor their way into the Pac-12 championship game. Is you miss Oregon and Washington, and Oregon State and Washington State are good football teams, but neither one is probably as tough as Oregon or Washington comparatively going into this season, and that's a break for the Bruins.
I think the biggest reason UCLA's win total is where it's at, it's not because of how good the team is, it's who they don't play. That's basically what it is, Spencer. You don't play Oregon, you don't play Washington.
And you don't play, and sorry to cut you off, but you don't play a Power 5 non-conference opponent.
That's why they could easily, quotes around easily, get to 10 wins, because it breaks their way. It built their way. Michigan backed away. You get an extra win in there. You pad it in with North Carolina Central. You got some sneaky tough but winnable games against non-Power 5s. And then you don't play two of the biggest contenders with their two big-name quarterbacks returning, either on the road or at home, as it could have laid out in a different year. The season broke after they lost to Oregon last year. This year, you don't have that game. It's early against Utah, all the hype against USC. Everything else is a game we could realistically see UCLA win. Will that happen? I'm not so sure, with what we're going to talk about in a moment here, Spencer, but it's just how it is.
Yeah, the range of wins, which is, we're not going into record predictions just yet. You got to let this stuff marinate over many weeks and months before you can make a record prediction. That sort of stuff will come in August, which is just a couple weeks away. Anyway, football is really close, and I'm very excited about that fact. But I think for UCLA, their range is 7 to 9 wins. I think 9. I think that's the absolute ceiling. I just struggle to see how between the Utah, the USC, the Oregon State. Actually, you know what? As I say it, it's managed. But you'd have to avoid another stumble. That's the thing. So I look at the schedule and I say you're an underdog at USC. You're an underdog at Utah. Probably going to be an underdog at Oregon State. Now, let's say you win one of those games, but you're probably losing the other two given that they're all on the road. So let's say you go 1-2 right there. You can only have one stumble the whole season if you're going to go 9-3. That seems like it's asking a lot from this UCLA team that's, kind of resetting or rebuilding in the one sense at key positions like, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, those spots. Not that they matter, of course, but
and their defense. Let's not forget.
And their defense, of course. So you have breaks. You have plenty of games where you'll be a favorite, but having just one stumble available to you between Washington State, Arizona, Cal, San Diego State, you could only lose one of those games, win the rest, go 1-2 in those tough games, which are all on the road, and go 9-3. That's the best outcome to me. But I do think there's enough talent there, and Chip Kelly's a good enough coach to where the low end is 7 wins. I don't think they're a 6-6 football team. I think they're 7-5 or 8-4, but I think 7-9 is kind of their range. Where do you see it?
I see themselves within this. I'm teetering between wanting to say my low end 7 or 8, and I don't want to be the same as you. So we're going to go with 8, and I'm wearing UCLA gear. I'm a UCLA guy. We'll go with 8. I could definitely see how things could fall off, and they could get to the under. But I do see in a world where they could get to 10 wins. I know I was negative Nancy earlier, but I will say 10 wins. Achievable, although I'm cheating. I'm going to poke in and pull this bowl game. I'm going to pull this bowl game in there and technically get that cheapo.
I'm just talking regular season here.
I got you.
But I see where you're coming from.
That's UCLA could have used that bowl win to get to that 10-win plateau, which is hard to get for UCLA. It seems like in program history over their entirety of a football program, but 8 to 10. It's a very optimistic range given my earlier rants, but I would say 8 to 10 is a good, it seems like Chip Kelly UCLA range, and that's just where they seem to be. And 10 wins, I think, would be a good season, a very good season.
Now, a lot of this is going to depend on the quarterback play. If they get high-level quarterback play, it could be 9 or 10. If it's kind of middle of the road in the Pac-12 with this great quarterback conference, it could be 7 or, dare I say, even 6, depending on the way the cookie crumbles. But I do think there are too many winnable games on here for Chip Kelly to only notch 6 wins. So I think 7 is the low end. But what's the latest on the quarterback situation, Zach? You have the veteran backup, Ethan Garbers, who was a 4-star recruit, if memory serves. Looks like a capable quarterback, or certainly could be. I thought at one point in time Cal should have looked at him. They went and got Sam Jackson, which I also think was a great addition. You got the 5-star high school All-American true freshman in Dante Moore, who's never taken a snap of college football in his life. And you have Colin Schlee, who's coming over from the Mid-American Conference in Kent State. Pretty sure it's Mid-American, the MAC. Little Maction. Yeah, Kent State, Maction, that sounds right. Which of those guys looks to be in the lead right now? Which of those guys do you think gives UCLA the best chance to win?
It's funny because you could argue for every single player. You've got Garbers, who one time was the Washington recruit, transferred over. You've got Schlee, who's the transfer, as you mentioned. I guess it's not officially, but if you decommit and then commit, you could think of it as a transfer mindset.
It's a flip.
It's a flip, right? So if Chip Kelly's like, I'm not going to get you initially, I'm going to pull you from somebody else. Garbers, he's been in the system for a long time. He almost took UCLA on a game-winning drive in the bowl game, filled in nicely. If you remember, DTR wasn't even in that end of the game against Pitt over New Year's Eve to December 30th, whatever day that was at the end of 2022.
Garbers also, by the way, I thought you were going to go to this because I'm an Oregon guy. He was in at the end of the game in 2021 against Oregon, almost led them on a game-tying field goal drive, threw an interception, made a young freshman mistake, but he was making throws, he was making plays, and I looked at it and I went, I could see that guy starting a quarterback.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a guy that he's a safe option. He's a guy that could get the job done. But of course, you've got the exciting options, right? You have Slee, who's gotten some NFL love, someone who's played the most at the D1 level. You bring him over, you think, all right, he's going to compete with Garbers. This is the guy that's going to challenge him. And while there were some ups and downs, I think in spring football, he has a chance to win this job. You don't really try to bring someone over like that if you don't expect him to truly challenge until we saw what happened in mid-December, and you bring in the all uber-hyped Dante Moore, who I would suggest, I think most UCLA fans would want, and I think you start him as soon as possible. And if things don't work out, you've got the portal, you've got the veterans. Dante Moore has a lot of intangibles, got a little bit of a leadership, not a little bit, more of a leadership quality for a youngster. And while there might be a little bit of some questions I've read about that arm strength deep down the field, you don't necessarily need all that in the Chip Kelly offense necessarily with the way he creates openings and with all the wide receiving threats. Maybe it doesn't even matter who's at quarterback if you can just hand the ball off to Carson Steele and the offensive line blocks and plays to perfection. I say Dante Moore is the option. Play him as quickly as possible and see how good he is. If he's not, then you can just kind of move away from him. But I'm not sure that's how it'll play out.
Yeah, I'm waiting on that announcement because, boy, that could, I think, impact not just the Pac-12 championship picture, but just where the Bruins' mentality is for this year. Because the way you make it sound is, go with Dante Moore. That's what people would like to have happen because we're trying to build for a championship team because we don't really have one right now, even though their win total is really high. But still lots to play out over there in UCLA. What part of Los Angeles is UCLA in? I struggled to think of it just now.
Westwood.
Westwood. I was about to say Hollywood, but I was like, no.
Well, I mean, technically there's Pasadena because that's the whole, everything where they play in the Rose Bowl. But Westwood is where the campus is.
Yeah, Westwood's what I was thinking of. And we're always thinking of having Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer on, host of Locked On UCLA. Anytime we talk about the Bruins, won't be the last we hear from him this summer before the season begins, which is a lot closer than we all realize, which is fantastic. Zach, thanks as always, my man.
Thank you.
Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.